when I talk about healer, really what I mean for me is that I'm holding that sacred container. I have come to the understanding, again, through personal experience and professional experience, that I'm not healing anybody. I'm creating a space so that they can heal. They're healing themselves.
You just lost your loved one. Now what? Welcome to the Grief and Life podcast, where we explore this new reality through grief-colored lenses. Openly, authentically, I'm your host, Nina Rodriguez. Let's get started.
Clinically trained and mystically guided. Today's guest embodies the philosophy encapsulated in this beautiful motto. Casey Stevens is a spiritual psychotherapist and consciousness coach and founder of Shrink Bigger. With a rich background in integrative psychotherapy, consciousness coaching, and quantum healing, Casey stands at the forefront of restructuring non-productive patterns to facilitate a radical transformation through conscious awakening. Her journey into healing began during a tumultuous season in her life marked by loss and grief and the profound search for meaning. Casey's evolution from wounded healer to embodied healer is a narrative of profound self-discovery and resilience. Through her healing journey, she unearthed the intricate patterns of her unconscious and aligned self with her true essence. Guided by a deep commitment to personal empowerment and true alignment, Casey's mission crystallized to not only help, but to heal. Her therapeutic approach transcends traditional clinical standards, offering a holistic framework that honors the interconnectedness of the bio, psycho, social, spiritual aspects of human experience. Through her interdisciplinary approach, Casey guides her clients towards deepening their connection with their sacred inner wisdom, paving the way for an awakened and meaningful life. Welcome, Casey Stevens, to the Grief and Life podcast.
Oh, thank you, Nina. It's such a privilege to be here, and thank you for that beautiful introduction.
It's an honor to have you. Thank you so much. So your work is essentially a bridge between the traditional and the spiritual, if you will, to give it a very broad name. But before we get to how you got there, tell us, who was Casey in the early days before you started this beautiful work, and what led to this awakening?
I think before all this started, I just wasn't super conscious of who I was. I think we just unconsciously absorb so many patterns, and we don't really get to know who we are often unless there's a catalyst to connect us to that version of ourselves, and we choose that path, right, of kind of post-traumatic growth. That's what it was for me, right? It's like, my life was wonderful and simple in all the ways. And I had, lots that was really wonderful, but I just hadn't done a lot of self-exploration or self-examination of who I was and what I really wanted, what my purpose. I just hadn't done any of that really until I was kind of forced to, right? And so who I am now is completely different. I would say certainly there are parts that were still consistent, right? I think of just our essence and how that comes through. But consciously, I'm just a different person than I was before having gone through all of the grief and loss and tragedy and challenge and things like that.
Well, it definitely changes us. And I know that you had some personal losses that you dealt with, from a marriage to his passing. So tell us as much or as little as you want to talk about that, and how maybe that was the opening to start exploring these topics.
Well, it was definitely the opening. It was, I had gotten married really young. I had started dating my husband in high school, actually, and then we got married just after college, and we're together in all 12 years. And he had some struggles. He had actually had, before we met, the loss of his father. So his father had taken his life when he was 15. So he always kind of struggled with not ever having processed. I wish he would have had somebody like you or I, or just somebody who held space and grief for him, because his family system actually didn't celebrate that as much as I wish that they would have, because I wish that he would have gotten some help around that time. And of course, I didn't know any better. I came on to the scene, and, our relationship seemed really beautiful for many, many years. I would say for 10 years, we really built up a lot of connection and credential, right? Just as a really beautiful connection. But he would have kind of bouts of struggling himself with depression and some suicide ideation and intent. But it wasn't until maybe the last couple of years of our marriage that really got pretty bad, pretty severe for him. And of course, I was very ill-equipped to know what to do. I, was a helper by nature, right? I always kind of would jump in and want to fix things and do whatever I could, but I wasn't always necessarily doing it from a meaningful place. And there was a lot of resistance because of his family history with having a significant loss of his father, right? And the way that his family organized around that was really to kind of be in denial. They just didn't believe in therapy or support or any of those things. And so it just wasn't celebrated or sought after. And then fast forward 15 years, when he started to really struggle in his own way with some of those same things, there was a lot of fear around getting help for him. And a lot of fear around even sharing it with his family system, because I think he knew how that would be received. And he wasn't wrong. And so for a lot of that, right, I just tried to do all the things that I knew, could think to do at the time. But of course, I was also ill-equipped to kind of carry this. I know, like you said, you've been a lot of a caretaker for your brother. And I really got into that caretaking role, mothering role. I really got into that, just feeling like responsible for his life for a long time. Really, it opened up, I started out doing the best I could. And then I realized I needed kind of support to integrate some of that awareness in, just sharing it with more of my community and then, his community, family, so that we could just have support, because it was just getting pretty dire. Like the efforting that I was making to help and doing that in isolation really wasn't helping at all. And so it wasn't making anything better, I should say. I feel good about, the effort that I was making, but I just recognized at a certain juncture, like, this is bigger than me. And I know that it's not his wish to include people in it, especially his family. But nonetheless, that's what I tried to do. So, and that's when I kind of got in during this whole period. First, I thought, okay, well, he needs help, right? It's like, well, let's get him some help, which of course was the urgent matter. But then quickly I learned how much it was depleting for me, right, to kind of carry this, and especially to carry it in the way that I was asked to carry it by him. And again, he wasn't getting better. It wasn't, there was kind of an intermittent quality in which he would, we got him help, we got him a doctor, we had him going to therapy on his own, but there just was not that investment really in showing up consistently, because he couldn't do that. What I really learned is we can't rescue or save anyone. Right. They have to choose that for themselves. That's their own, soul's journey, and they have to really choose it or else it won't work. So that's when I started the work, kind of focused initially on him, but I noticed how much I was kind of becoming very depleted at that time. So then it shifted to maybe us, right? It's like, okay, well, our marriage is, really struggling, and we need to get help for that. And then that eventually translated into me getting the help that I needed, right? And the support, which after his passing and all of that, right? I was so glad that I had initiated that process. And it was even during that time, even before his passing, that I decided I wanted to go back to school and do this work. And so it was, and so much more, to all of that than there is space even to talk about. But it was quite a journey, really, really challenging few years. And eventually I'm really glad, because of course I was always available, to help and support in all the ways that I did, but I just learned how to do that better. And I learned how to take care of myself at the same time. And I learned that I wanted to help other people in this way that were open and receptive, which is when I decided to go back to school and actually figure out what the heck I was doing after I had done a lot of inner work myself. So yeah, that's what that really looked like. And then it was during that period when I was still in school, in my psychology program, that there was this loss. So of course, all this tremendous pressure, right, to be doing so many things and then be grieving. Although I had really been, it's interesting because I had really been in many ways grieving him for several years. Like he just hadn't been really any semblance of himself for a few years. And so again, all the beautiful time that I had with him held this space for me that I could kind of see him in both of these ways and really celebrate that version of him rather than what it became at the end. So that, hopefully that answers. And then I just kind of dove in and, kept going. And I will say this, so much of who I am now is a direct result of those tragedies and losses and the grief that I went through at that time. And it just really opened me up, right? I learned how to balance and take care of. It opened me up spiritually. There was a lot that would come through I think because he had kind of been in this very tormented place before he left, it hit right away. I mean, my gifts and my spirituality had already kind of started to open up with my own healer. I happen to have a beautiful healer who was pretty spiritual in her own right, but she was also a therapist. And so we could live in both worlds of kind of bridging science and spirit together. And that was so valuable. And then again, after I initiated my own process, right, to do this work and help people in this way, then the loss came. And so there were just so many layers of it that just felt like it went on for years and years and years. And it never really stops, as you know. But a lot of my intuitive gifts opened up because what I did find is after his passing, that his spirit would come through to me, and I just couldn't deny what was happening. I didn't talk about it to a lot of people, but at the time, now I'm much, more free, but his spirit was just kind of omnipresent around, I think, because he had felt pretty tormented right at the end of his life and really not himself. And I think there was just a lot of guilt and protection that he felt. It was like he came back and he was this old version of him that I knew. And the energy signature of people that you love, you can just feel what's what. So when that presence comes around, and I think, again, there was just this awakening, right, with even kind of some of those gifts. Not that I call myself a medium or anything, but there's no denying that that's what I was experiencing. And it was so clear that it was him and that he was really trying to heal something that, frankly, had felt really incomplete. Like there wasn't any real closure. And so for me, it ended up being this beautiful process for, again, years and years when this was just happening. I mean, I would be, home at night and things happen, just like that. You can't deny that it's like, okay, there's really this omnipresence here. And I know exactly who it is. There's no denying it. I know exactly what's happening. I know exactly what this energy is. And it felt really lovely and beautiful. And so there was this catharsis that could happen with me and him, right, together, that it was just this beautiful way that we could heal this thing that had felt in my heart very incomplete and like it hadn't had any closure because of the ending. I just kind of leaned into that and I kept it really private and I didn't talk about it too much, but I just let myself experience that healing in a way that only, we could. So
thank you for sharing so openly. And first, I want to honor that these topics and the whole grief conversation I feel is relatively new. So in all fairness, maybe when these families, like his family, were a little bit more reserved about, or a lot more reserved about not discussing this and maybe didn't have the words or the tools on how to address this. In all fairness, I feel like that has been more the norm throughout history, where it is now changing, thankfully.
Yes.
Because grief changes us profoundly. I'm sure the ripple effect of his father's loss had an impact on his family and ultimately everything that we are talking about today. And
Absolutely.
because we talk about it, we have the ability to transmute it. It sounds like that's some of the work that you started to do right before his passing. And man, talk about layers on layers. You were completely full and you had this, it was this and that. Grief is this and that and all the things all at once. So it sounds like you were also dealing with a lot yourself, but ultimately, thanks to also the special light workers or angels or blessings in human form that come into our lives. And it sounds like in this case, it was the therapist that you were going to who showed you that it is possible to blend the medical with the spiritual. And to be honest, I don't know why it was ever isolated or separated, because we are mind, body, spirit, but that's a whole other topic. So you met this person, you started to notice your gifts, you were reframing and transmuting and processing everything that happened. Sounds like your training was Western based. So when did you realize that you wanted to add other elements, maybe Eastern, maybe spirituality, maybe other tools that are not necessarily as tangible or scientific? How did that come about?
Well, it actually happened before I even started. So as I was working with her, and again, I had a whole different life, a whole different career, and everything just was crumbling. So I had to reconfigure everything. I couldn't not re-examine every part of my life. I had to really face being independent and what that would look like, right? And how, like, what was I knew I didn't, want to do that in just a surface way anymore. I felt such a calling at that time to help. I think I can imagine, right? I didn't hear it directly from you, but it's just sort of calling to help. And that my purpose was bigger, that I could help people in this way that were suffering Of course, I needed to learn some things about that first. But before I decided even to go back and study the Western psychology kind of clinical work, I knew that I wanted to integrate the spirit and the ancient trainings, some of these Eastern modalities, and the esoteric, right? I mean, I knew that I wanted to incorporate that. I didn't know exactly what that would look like. Like I had some ideas of, okay, well, I'll try this training, but I just was hungry at that time. I knew, okay, well, I've got to get this foundation. I've got to do this framework. I'm going to do a huge undertaking to go back to school and just get that clinical licensure, right? So I was very clear about that. And that took up a lot of time and energy. But along the way, when I could kind of feed it in on a weekend or something, I would take this training or I would sign up for that training. And I just kind of kept incorporating because I was really just hungry to experience everything. It was like I had truly had this awakening. And I still didn't know what I didn't know, but I was just wanted to absorb as much as I possibly could. And it was all that I was focused on. It was the most important thing to me. It was the way that I spent all my free time, all my free money. You know, I just kind of dove into really wanting to see what resonated, because I also knew with my therapist and healer, and she would have called herself a therapist, but again, she kind of practiced in this witchy way that I loved. I knew that I didn't have the exact same, I really believe this, that we all come with our own unique gifts. And so I needed to figure out what mine were, that weren't copying her, doing it exactly the way she did it. I just knew that I loved that she incorporated the science and the spirit. And I wanted to incorporate, and I had always been intuitive, but even my intuition, I'd probably separated from it for much of my life. And so it was reconnecting to that, which I had started doing in all that healing before I went back to school. But when I did decide to go back, I was just really, really clear that it was going to be a hybrid. I was going to practice in this way that she practiced, which was a hybrid between kind of the Eastern and the Western modalities and the science and the spirit, right? I just knew that I wanted to do that, but I needed to figure out how would that be really authentic for me to practice. And so what I just thought, okay, well, I just need to consume, study with as many mentors as I can, do as many trainings as I can, get the exposure to as much as I possibly, and that's tapered off a bit. Sorry, there's a siren going by. That's tapered off, right? I mean, initially I was just like anything, but I really got to listen to my own inner voice of what really resonated and what felt meaningful and what was additive based on, how I ran that through my truth center for me, right? Because, what resonates for one person could be different than what resonates for me. And it's all perfect. It just, I needed to really listen to that. And then ultimately what I find is, as I practice now, and I've been doing this over a decade, been in practice for over a decade, I notice that really what makes me the best at what I do is just really honoring that. It's not like I'm ascribing to any one training, but I'm just really being true to myself. And whether people ever know what I've experienced, I'm always filtering through my lens of expertise, my own experiences. And I think it makes me really good at what I do because of that. And I don't have to share that. Some people know, or there might be, it might be appropriate to talk about that, with them if it's meaningful for them and their healing. But what I know for sure is I think what makes me the best at what I do is the experience I've had and how I filter everything through that lens, and the, awakening, like I said, this kind of spiritual connection that I have that's my own unique intuition, and the way that filters through my body and my life, and the way that then I can use that for good in the world when I'm sitting with somebody else, because I'm so much more open and I can receive so much more to be beneficial to them when I am operating or practicing from that place of authenticity.
I really want to highlight the truth center aspect of it. I want to know how you develop that. It's something that I recently learned maybe about a couple of years ago, and I'm starting to really work that within myself, and it has been life-changing for the best, in the best way possible. So tell us about how you develop that, how you identify that, and how that works whenever you have to make a decision or be intuitive about the client's needs. Because clients, let's be honest, they don't always disclose everything, that for many reasons. They're not comfortable. They don't have the words for it. They might not even know what's going on. But
they're not
you see that exactly. You see the holistic picture. So tell us a little bit about that process.
For me, I mean, I really think it's peeling away what we think we know and questioning everything about ourselves, which is a long process. We have to kind of peel away whatever are the constructs or the compensatory strategies or the programs that we've absorbed that we didn't even know weren't us, that we've just kind of carried on, that might be generational or cultural or societal or familial or ancestral or any of those things. We have to really peel it all back, right, and understand, is this true for me, right? This is where I came from and this is what I've learned and what I've absorbed, but how much of my personality and my identity is really me that I consciously chose? And so I just think of it as our pure, I mean, I really believe that we come in as souls and there is a unique energy signature that we are born with, right? And there's an essence to that. And we usually, when we take on compensatory strategies, we take on strategies that are in line with that, but they might take us out of our center. And so we lose sense with our intuition or our connection with self, like that naturally, that authenticity that I think that we are born with as souls organically, right? And to no fault of anyone, but we just move further away on this spectrum of authenticity towards connection. And so in order to have connection in our families and our communities and our schools, with our friends, with so many systems that we're part of, we take on that understanding of the world without really questioning it ourselves. And that opportunity usually doesn't come until we're adults. And again, we have the opportunity, right, to dive in and really heal in this deeper way. And it really, I think the first thing is peeling that back and then looking back. And it's not to discard our family systems or anything, but it's really to say, what of that is true for me? What of that I experienced is really true for me? What do I want to keep and what do I not? And this is the process in psychology we call differentiation, where it's really understanding, yes, this is what I learned, but can I overcome the anxiety and the fear that I'll lose connection if I'm true to myself and I go back towards this authenticity? And so I think that authenticity is really how we practice and where we feel centered and where we're connected to our true essence, where we're embodied in our values, where we're in integrity with our own truth and our own soul. And when we do that, we have this kind of filter, this truth center that we can run anything through. I probably disconnected from my intuition for many reasons, throughout my life, just taking on different strategies and all of those things. But I disconnected even more when I was going through this period with my husband, right? Because I just like, oh my gosh, what do I know? I have no idea what I'm doing. You just realize if you have any ego, which we all can develop an ego, right? As children and then into our 20s, I think is probably when it's at its peak, right? It certainly was for me. Started to like doubt and question all of these things about, and then I had to repair my connection with my intuition in exactly the way I just described, understanding how had I become so enmeshed with my husband that I didn't even really know myself, or I was living more for him than for myself, and I didn't know the difference, right? Because I had placed so much value on the external. And so it was really coming back to home inside myself and learning who I was and what pieces of that was serving me, and how I could really be most powerful is not to abandon or disconnect from those people we love. I'm not suggesting that at all, but rather how can we be in connection with people from our most empowered place, right? So that there's really an interconnectedness that's happening rather than a codependence in any way. And I know for sure I'd taken on some codependent kind of enmeshed qualities, right? And how can you not, right? When somebody's struggling and suffering, and you're a loving heart, it's hard not to pour yourself into them. And, somebody has to be monitoring what's happening to you. And so I think I had lost touch with that for a little while within myself. So for me, if I were working with somebody, and again, because I've experienced it, I know exactly how to do it and what that looks like. It's dismantling everything that you think you know about your personality. And so often we think our personality, our identity is who we are, but it's not. There are these constructs, right, that we have to dismantle so that we can really get back to that truth center. And then once we've aligned with that and we know ourselves, not that we can't be evolving and growing, I hope to evolve and grow and be a student my entire life, but it's always realigning with that and learning how to listen. And I think our bodies are really wise places to experience that, right? Like they will tell you when something is out of balance. You will notice because you're feeling anxiety or this, it's like, notice if you're pulled out of that center point and you're not going to access your best decision making when you're out of that center point. And so it's really learning how to be in that. And when I'm in my center point, well, I'm most powerful, I'm most intuitive, I'm most balanced. It probably feels best to be around me energetically. And I think that's true for all of us. And I think when we heal ourselves in this way, that's where we're most able, we're most influential in being able to heal others.
Very powerful. And anybody who has experienced some type of trauma or this innate human desire to want to rescue, like I need to help them, I need to save them, what can I do? What else can I do? And you just literally get consumed. You consume yourself trying to find answers for somebody else. That's a lot of that codependent behavior. So I really like what you said, that in helping yourself, you actually help other people. We have the order reversed. I personally think we are spirit having a human experience. So parting from that premise, this work, everything you just said resonated so deeply, because that work is extremely powerful. If you close your eyes and you're not your name, gender, nationality, what did this soul embodying you want to do in this existence? And if you allow some silence and some space after that answer, man, that is a powerful, powerful place to part from. But undoing that takes a lot of effort, oftentimes the coaching. So is this something that you work with your clients in doing?
All the time. Yeah. It's a lot of what I do, because I can heal other people best based on the ways that I have already been through that, which is true for all of us. It's really kind of helping people peel that back and understand themselves and how they've been operating in the world, and what of that is really conscious, or is it serving you? Is it productive again in your life? And if it's not, if you feel disconnected from your intuition, if you don't feel peaceful, if your relationships are chaotic, however that could show up, if you're not as successful as you want to be, whatever those things are, if there is something that is not aligned in your life, then really re-examining, like, there is no better investment. And if you want to be a helper, I work with a lot of people who are doctors, psychiatrists, nurses. They're in the helping field. They're therapists. They'll come to me and say, how do I work in this way? It just is this thing that I can really kind of coach and mentor people through. It's like, really wasn't too popular, especially a decade ago when I kind of dove in and was practicing, and I had to ease my way into that as well. But really noticing what have I done that I really know through and through, because I trust it, and people are hungry to optimize their life in that way. And again, I think we're so much more powerful if your essence is to be a helper by nature. If you do this work, the place from which you can practice and really help others to shift, which yourself from your own experience, is just on a next level, right? You can have so much more impact. You can have so much more influence when you can hold more of that's what I call kind of a sacred container for people, that sacred circle where you're not trying to pull them along. You're not trying to rush them. You're giving them the dignity of their own process and allowing them to discover that innate wisdom inside themselves and connect to that.
I love that, the sacred container. We're whole human beings, and ultimately we have our own answers. It's just sometimes we need each other to help get those answers out and to find that alignment once again. So there's a balance between being the healer and allowing the clients to take ownership of their healing. So how do you walk that balance, and maybe even define what's healing? I feel like healing is used so broadly these days that it almost like the meaning has been diluted. So how do you define that in your practice? What do you consider a success story for a client?
Yeah, good question. So to start with the healing, I do think, right, I mean, I can only speak to what it means for me. And when I talk about healer, really what I mean for me is that I'm holding that sacred container. I have come to the understanding, again, through personal experience and professional experience, that I'm not healing anybody. I'm creating a space so that they can heal. They are healing themselves. To take that even further, what healing is to me is not something that ever ends. It's not something that we ever arrive at a destination, right? We just get better at knowing how to heal ourselves. And when a challenge arises in our life, and they will, because we are having this human experience, we trust in ourselves and our ability to handle it. And we know what would be best in that moment. We run that through our truth center. We understand intuitively, okay, this is a problem. Well, how would I take this problem and overlay solutions, that a process, right, a pattern, an organization into our own life and our own being, so that we can shift out of this as swiftly and smoothly as possible. And so when you learn how to do that, it's such an empowered place that you are in. And even though challenges will arise, you feel capable and competent to handle them, right? I think before, even looking back on my story that I was talking about, I just didn't feel confident in that. It was like I was trying lots of things, but I didn't really know how to apply that in a way that it would truly be beneficial. And I needed to outsource that to somebody who had more agency in that way than I did at that time, that had, very little consciousness about that. Right. So I think it's something I don't know about you, but I'll be healing for the rest of my life. And so it's not some place. I will say this, the confidence that you have and the sense of empowerment over your ability to do that just becomes more and more and more powerful the more you dive into it. And the challenges that come up feel like they're less, what would have totally dysregulated me 15 years ago might be a blip, might be like, oh, I have a little stress. Okay, I need to sit with this. But you just don't stay in those nervous system states for long. You're not I lived in a dysregulated nervous system for years before I knew better. And so I had to really learn how to reset my nervous system and what that baseline was like for me, and how to get out of this place where I was just all the time, right? I mean, it's automatically running in the background, my adrenals, my cortisol, just, and we can look like it's, okay on the surface, but inside there's chaos going on. And so how to learn to separate from that chaos. And when chaotic things in our external world come up around us, we can organize and actually smooth that out very quickly inside ourselves and around us when we've learned how to do this. And so that's, to me, what healing is, right? It's like not a destination. I'm not the healer of anybody. I can certainly, if you are ready and invested and truly desire to be healed, and that comes through in all layers of your being, it's a powerful container to be in when you show up and choose somebody as a healer, right? As a therapist, whatever they are, a coach. It's a truly powerful place to be in. Then that healing can happen through you, right? I can just hold a container and the healing happens through you is my belief in that.
So much of this work is returning agency to the person, to yourself, because if we don't trust ourselves, especially in grief after loss of a person, so much is broken, so much is scattered. It feels like there's destruction everywhere, literal and figuratively speaking, and emotional and energy-wise. How do we put order back? And I've heard you say this beautiful phrase. I don't know if I'm going to get it right, but I've heard you say that it's about putting order to your energy, or organizing your energy. I think it's the phrase. I love that phrase because it's, yes, there's the nervous system regulation, but that's one component of the holistic picture. And to answer your question, yes, I believe that we evolve. Life will do things and throw things at us at all times. And we're going to need different tools in each stage. And so that's why the healing, as you define it, is never really over, because we're not static. We're dynamic creatures, and life is dynamic, and we're always going to have to adapt. So I really like that. But could you tell the audience two things that I really want to highlight? One is about the codependency and the archetype of the rescuer, and how that really is about, in a way, is about control. It can't be about control, and it actually hinders the other person. You're interfering with other people's free will and destiny, and sometimes the work that they need to do, sometimes with the best of intentions, but that's not quite how it comes out. And then the second is, tell us about the organizing your energy concept. I love that.
So the drama triangle, which is my favorite thing to talk to people, I wish we all learned this growing up. We do learn it, just not consciously growing up. We learn it from our family systems, right? Because we naturally, I think, again, we have an essence, but then in our family systems, we all have this drama triangle inside of us, again, if we're on it. And, unless you're raised by Himalayan monks or something, right? Like, we all absorb the drama triangle in our own way. And so what that means is in this triangle, there is the victim, the rescuer, and the perpetrator. And we all have all aspects inside of us, but we usually kind of hang on one corner that is our tendency. And we hang on that corner based on, I believe, our essence of how we come in, right? Like there are just helpers among us. The way we metabolize trauma or difficult situations, right? So we adapt. Our adaptive child inside takes on these parts. but it's really in response. It could be if you grew up in a family system where, your dad was perpetrating your mom, meaning maybe there was some abuse there, or there was some criticism, or there was something. And again, I'm just totally hypothetical situation. And so then she would be then victimized it. Then as a child, we would take on in our own way, maybe the rescuer role. And this can feed in any direction. And you just kind of want to look into your family system and say, who played this role predominantly? Who played that role predominantly? And then how did I show up? And what did I do? I tend to attract people that I work with that were also rescuers, because I would have been a rescuer. That was the most natural essence for me, but also that just would be my tendency. And for me, it was interesting because it was a lot of what I would see my parents were rescuers too. So sometimes, again, there's this dynamic, but we all can have all parts. So again, depending on what the circumstances are. So it's really kind of understanding where you are on the drama triangle, which there's lots that I could say, but I would say to anyone, if you don't know about the drama triangle, look it up and research it a little bit and just drop into the energy. My favorite way is drop into the energy, right? Because when we say victim consciousness, you know what that is. But if somebody's struggling and suicidal or addicted or anything, having their nervous system shut down in some kind of way, they're going to go into that victim. And so then when we're not operating consciously in a family system or as adults, right, in partnerships or dynamics that we're part of, because it's never stops. We just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it throughout life. It's noticing how I took that on and how then I might really be coming from a loving, beautiful place where I am a giving, one of my favorite qualities in anybody is a generosity of spirit. And so here, I think I'm coming from a generosity of spirit because I value that so much. And that is part of my true essence, which is why I respect it and value it so much. But it can go off kilter, right? If somebody in your system, for me, that would have been my husband, really went into the victim consciousness, right, of the triangle, well, then I really went into this rescuer, saver, fixer, where I wanted to take on this, or I felt like I needed to take on this part of me that was going to help him and make him well. And so there's kind of an over-functioning, under-functioning quality that can happen there. But there's so many reasons that we take on this more. And it's not that we're in that all the time, by the way. Like if we consciously show up in the way that we've been talking about, if you get empowered and are your authentic self, well, then you can be a healer, an embodied healer, rather than a wounded healer, right? Which I talk about, which would be more of the drama triangle, where there's a part of us that's like, I would overfunction for him and really felt responsible for his life in all of these ways. And again, that can be mothering that I was doing, overfunctioning that I was doing, calling to make sure he was at his appointment, calling his doctor to make sure, counting his pills to make sure he had taken his medication. I mean, all the things that were just really overfunctioning. And I was doing it, of course, there was a part of it, right, that was just, I love him and I want the best for him and all of that. But a part of it was like, I'm not going to be well if he's not well. If he's unwell, I can't endure that. I can't tolerate the feeling of his unwellness, and I can't. And so it's a fine line of knowing what's healthy and what's kind of venturing into that. But I definitely did, especially because there was this request, right, to keep a secret, right, to not share it with anyone from my husband directly. There was this request that came through. And so I was trying to honor that as well, right, and trying to be good in all of these ways. So we can feel there's lots of reasons we can go into the helper. But again, I tend to talk to people who are more that than anything else in my work, because there's just, I think, an energy that attracts that, because that's what I did, right? But we can do it for lots of reasons. It can be our ego that we're feeding. It's like, well, I feel superior. You're having a struggle and I feel better. I feel good about myself because I'm lifting you up and taking on, all of this responsibility. There can be lots of reasons we do it. And so again, probably more than we can entirely dive into in the concept of that, but it's just really understanding that when we're rescuing, when that person hasn't explicitly asked us to do that, they haven't said, could you help me with this? Hey, could you count my medication and make sure could you remind me tomorrow to take my could you check in and make sure I'm going to my appointment? If we just take that on ourselves, without and it can be tricky and convoluted too, because we can also see them in a state where, they can't do that themselves. But what we do when we overfunction is we can take away some of their power, right? So we're absorbing the power that they don't have, and then they become even more atrophied, and there can be a dynamic with that. So it's really slippery slope to get into that. And so just learning more about that was really, really, really useful for me. I find that most people really love understanding it more. And then again, it's looking into the energy consciousness. Like whenever I'm around, when I see somebody being perpetrated, how do I go in to rescue, right? And that might be becoming the class clown or the pleaser, or being super nice or not having any needs. There's so many ways that we can embody this helper dynamic, but ultimately it's not serving. And the reason it doesn't serve is whatever dynamic, if it's your family of origin and we all still, might be connected to our family of origin, whether we were children or as adults, it doesn't break the cycle. So if we just keep showing up and doing what we're doing, it doesn't break the ancestral trauma, this generational pattern that needs to be broken, where everyone colludes with the patterns of dysfunction without really breaking them. And so it's important that we learn how to do that ourselves, and not in a way like, okay, well, I'm going to tell you how to do it, but I'm just going to do it myself. And I'm going to see if this can shift the dynamic and break these ancestral dynamics. And so it's really, really important to do, because when we heal ourselves, I also believe that we can't not uplift, even if the people in our family system, or they could be our, I say family system, I mean like our family of origin, but it could also be our chosen families, our marriages, our own children. If we don't break those patterns, if we keep colluding with them, then it just keeps being passed down through generations. Whatever is the dynamic that is at play in your family system, you'll just reinvent that with your own family system and in your own life. And so it's really important to break that, so that we can all be healthy and well, and we can influence. If there is somebody in your family system, again, whatever family system that is struggling or suffering, the best chance that we have of helping them to not struggle or suffer is if we stop colluding with the energy that we were showing up in this drama triangle dynamic. So it's really powerful, important work. And I'm, distilling it down way too simply now, but I would really recommend, if anybody doesn't know about it, to look into it, so that you can really see that me doing this, I can, even if somebody comes in and let's say couples therapy, right? And one person wants to invest in the work and the other doesn't, you can shift that dynamic by just choosing to do the work. Don't try to drag your person there or force it. Do the work yourself and then see, does that influence or inspire in some unconscious, subtle way, even if this person seems very resistant to that? Does that change things? It's really, really, really important work. Then I would just say about organizing energy. To me, it's again, kind of going back to what I talked about, that I learned what my magic was. I have this way of organizing energy in my field that it's just become really clear. It's like how I see things. When I listen to people talk about dynamics or relationships or people, situations they're in, I just kind of start sorting it and organizing it in my brain, and I can see patterns really well. And so for me, everything is energy. And so if you really then can feel into the energetic of something, which is also removes the judgment from anything, right? Any challenge or struggle or compensatory strategy or way that we're expressing isn't to be judged. It's not bad, even extreme things, right? It's really understanding what has happened so that that energetic is present, and how do we shift it if it's not optimal or it's creating some distress or dysfunction in this person's life. So it's really kind of this objective view of just how do we organize that energy. And we look for patterns, I think, and then we sort and figure out how to conceptualize and make really practical and tangible and grounded for people so that they can see energy in a similar way. And so I try to explain the way I see it to other people so that they can then do that. But I also think when we're going in and holding a sacred container, if that's energy work or if it's talk therapy or if it's psychoeducation or coaching or whatever it is, it's really how do we figure out what the most organized, coherent energy is inside of you and your field. And so that's not me projecting my values onto them, but it's them, again, getting in touch with their own values and understanding and then practicing and experiencing what feels coherent inside of me. I just have a particular way that I notice, no matter what trainings I did, it's just a way that I can conceptualize and sit with somebody and really help to facilitate that organization of energy, whether that's practically or energetically, right? There is kind of this coherence that I can hold this container and help them do. And so I just really think it's kind of the way that I, use my own kind of witchy magic that feels really natural, but it's also grounded in all of these ways that really help other people to find that coherence inside themselves.
That is very powerful work. In a way, it's like regulating your nervous system, but holistically regulating your whole life. and identifying patterns. It sounds like from the family systems to the organizing your energy, it's about identifying these patterns in your own life and in your own inner workings, and then giving it some order. Once you're operating from that premise, I mean, the world is yours. And so much, it's not that you fix things necessarily, because life will things will still show up, but you have better tools and better experience and better frameworks with which to either cut the pattern where it needs to be stopped or move forward in a different direction. So thank you for that explanation. I could talk to you for hours about this, but we're coming up here on the hour. This is fascinating work. I want the listeners to be able to find you and find your information and work with you, because my goodness, this is just a tiny sample of the work that she can do for each individual. So if any of this resonated, I highly encourage you to visit her page. And if you don't mind, Casey, telling us where they can find your information and where they can sign up for a session.
Well, the name of my practice is Shrink Bigger. So you can find my website, shrinkbigger.com, or I'm on Instagram as well. And then you can also go onto my website and sign up for like free meditations or things like that. And then I send out things like this content that people can taste and sample and hopefully learn something. And so that's another great way, is just to get on the email list and find out free ways of experiencing this healing art. But anyone that's interested, you're welcome to connect. And I always think just trust what feels true to you. And if it resonates, then beautiful. Happy to support anyone in their healing.
All of this will be, of course, linked in the show notes. As a parting thought, open floor for you to say anything that is on your heart that maybe we didn't cover. What is your dream? What is your ultimate vision for the type of work that you're doing?
Just thank you for the work you do. And I think it's so important and such a conscious shift where we can really sit with grief and people in that, because it can take so many shapes and forms and people metabolize that in different ways. But I think it's important to have conversations and to normalize these topics that, there can be these invisible ways that we're living with all of this pain. And we need to normalize it. We need to create space for people to be with that. So I love what you're doing and broadcasting it in this beautiful way that you do. So I would say that. And what's next for me? I don't know. I mean, I think sometimes about writing a book, or I love podcasts for this reason. I want to help and influence as many people as I can. And I love one-on-one work, because there's such an intimacy and collaboration that happens, and so much beauty that I know I've experienced as a student of that work. But I think that it's so magical. But I think, how can we touch and uplift as many lives as possible, which is what I love about podcasts or maybe groups. And so I might have a little more of that coming in the future, so that there's impact that can be made in the world in a bigger way, whoever needs it, that it's available to as many people as possible.
Thank you so much, Casey. Thank you for your beautiful energy, for your work. And thank you for being here. I'll link all your information in the show notes. And it was an absolute honor to have you. Thank you, Casey.
It was my privilege. Thank you, Nina.
That's it for today's episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Grief and Light podcast. I'd also love to connect with you and hear your thoughts and your stories. Feel free to share them with me via my Instagram page at Grief and Light, or you can also visit griefandlight.com for more information and updates. Thank you so much for being here, for being you, and always remember, you are not alone.